Hi, my name is Lynn-Ellin Zeigler, and I did my Behaviorist biography project on Karola Dillenburger-Keenan, who is a BCBAD at Queen's University in Belfast, Northern Ireland. There we go. She is also an active researcher, professor, and clinical psychologist. She works out of Queen's University in Belfast, as I mentioned, and she is the director of the Center for Behavior Analysis at Queen's University. She received her PhD in 1991 from the University of Ulster and her BCBAD in 2006. She has also been the developer of several training courses in ASD and applied behavior analysis, specifically kind of fundamental information about ASD as well as behavior analysis. She was a researcher in a government-funded BASE project regarding autism in public policy in the UK, and she has 229 credited publications. I included a quote from her website in which she says, "My main research leadership concerns applied behavior analysis and evidence-based decision-making in clinical and educational interventions." So I compiled 5 articles from ResearchGate.net and Google Scholar in order to put together this presentation, and I will talk more in depth about them in a couple of upcoming slides. But first I'm going to talk about some of her overall themes. She talks a lot about, in her research, the incongruity between clinicians and professionals who are treating autism spectrum disorder. I was particularly interested in this because I know from my personal experience that there is a lot of discrepancy between practitioners across different fields and different disciplines. She also talks about the perceptions and understanding of ABA across these different disciplines, as well as across parents, caregivers, and professionals themselves, differences in training and the actual application of ABA in public policy, specifically in the UK, cross-cultural differences in implementing ABA, and evidence-based decision-making. So the first article I looked at was titled, "Living with Children Diagnosed with Autism Spectrum Disorder, Parental and Professional Views." This was a survey given to both parents and professionals looking at what were their primary concerns with the either child for the parents or client for the professionals. She found that parents worried primarily about the future of their children, such as employment and housing opportunities, as well as social and communication needs, whereas professionals reported concern over restrictions to the whole family, so looking at the family's ability to for the parents to have full-time work, go on vacations, and do traditional family activities, and support other members of the family who do not have ASD. She did find that both parents and professionals reported concerns about lack of access to information like research and literature itself, about different interventions and about ASD in general. And she said that this has a possible implication that there's a responsibility of professionals to provide better resources and training for parents. If professionals are the ones who have more access to it, it should be their responsibility to then be sharing that research with parents as much and as effectively as possible. The next article I looked at was titled, "Staff Training in Autism, the One-Eyed Woman." I was interested in that title, so I looked that up, and I found that the phrase, "the one-eyed woman," comes from a proverb that says, "In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king." And I thought that this was very metaphorically telling with the field of autism support, because it is so new. There are a lot of people who are not as informed as we could be, because there's still a lot that we haven't discovered, but they're deemed as being experts and fully understanding autism, even though no one fully understands autism at this point. So that's a great title. And digging into that, that was another series of interviews and surveys with adults with autism who required direct support, parents and caregivers, and professionals. This looked specifically at the level of autism-specific training that they received, and she divided it into 3 different levels or tiers of training. Level 1 was 1 to 2 hour training. Level 2 was a half-day training, and number 3 was a full-day training. And as somebody who works directly in the field of autism support, just knowing that the highest level was still only a full day of training is certainly eyebrow-raising. So she even more unfortunately found that the majority of staff members only received that level tier 1 training, so the 1 to 2 hours a day. She, of course, drew the conclusion that this could have harmful impacts on the people who are receiving support. And she also found that this could potentially be correlated, the inadequate training could potentially be correlated with the high likelihood of adults with autism suffering also from depression and anxiety. The next article I looked at was multidisciplinary teamwork in autism, can one size fit all. In the introduction to this article, she quotes, "Unlike many other diagnoses, there is often limited agreement between professionals as to what constitutes the best way forward after diagnosis." I found this very reflective of my own experience as well. And she talks about how naturally uniformity in practice, so every practitioner involved on a certain case using the same practices is associated with efficacy in treatment, which of course makes sense because if everybody's doing something different, then all of those treatments are not going to be as effective. She said that even though there is going to be discrepancy between different people about what's the best individual practices for each student or child or person, the principles of ABA have the ability to kind of be that foundation and to shape any practice, such as things like the empirical data collection that is very pertinent and emphasized in ABA, the scientific method, and that parent and caregiver training that's also emphasized. Next, I looked at an article called How Fake News Affects Autism Policy. This specifically looked at differences between ABA public policy in North America and in the United Kingdom. She found that in the US and in Canada, ABA is considered a gold standard practice. So it's widely accepted and it's considered medically sound and is often funded by insurance. However, in the UK, ABA is not nationally recognized as an evidence-based practice, which I found to be very surprising. She believes that this is due to personal bias and lack of adequate training, which leads to misinformation. Lastly, I looked at an article titled, "Does Culture Matter in ABA-Based Autism Interventions, Parent and Professional Experiences in the UK and China?" She found that ABA practice in China tends to rely more heavily on parent training and implementation than the UK, and also that parents in China are often the first to notice signs of autism. I found this interesting and kind of different than what I was expecting, but then she explained it further that there is a heightened emphasis on the family, especially extended family members all living together and supporting each other in China, and this impacts services and just general perceptions of how to best run programs and implement ABA. Families in China also tend to seek support internally because there are not as many adequate local services around them that they can reach out to. They either have to kind of work within the family, or they have to go to like mainland China and other more heavily populated areas in order to get the support that they need. She kind of looked at this contrasting in the UK and found that industrialization in the UK has led to full-time work for mothers, so parent implementation is not as emphasized. So I'm going to run through my mock interview questions very quickly. The first one I thought of was, what solutions to the discrepancies, specifically among professionals supporting individuals on the autism spectrum, can you derive from the findings in your work? Number 2, do you believe adequate and accepted training in ABA is possible across non-BCBA professionals, or do you feel that it is necessary for BCBAs to be in consistent collaboration with other professionals? Number 3, do you believe that the discrepancies between North America and the UK regarding autism policy stem from cultural differences, biases specific to government officials, or from another source? Number 4, with clear discrepancies between parents and professionals, how do we as practitioners account for lived experience while providing services without losing the purely empirical basis of ABA or adopting mentalistic perspectives? And lastly, number 5, in your opinion, what can BCBAs and governing bodies of ABA practice improve to make research more accessible and accepted across parties, given the history of rejection and criticism of ABA in the public eye? So to summarize, implications for future practice, of course, as a practitioner, taking her work can help strengthen ABA practices internally, but externally it can emphasize the access to research that's needed across parties and across professionals and families and anyone who is supporting anyone with autism, or even just the community and community awareness. This also kind of emphasizes the need to adapt services to fit the needs of families and individuals. It reflects my own personal experience, as I mentioned, with discrepancies across professionals, disciplines, and families, and it kind of makes me more aware of where some of those discrepancies may be coming from and what some of the solutions potentially could be. Her research provides evidence that parental input is critical for ABA treatment, including considering what parents find important and don't find important. She gave the example in the paper that looked at professional versus parent views that parents tend to report stereotypy and repetitive behaviors as being less of a concern than professionals do. So that would be an example of a time when professionals need to be looking to parents as to what is their biggest concern and shaping treatment plans based off of that. Obviously, just being aware of cross-cultural differences, that ABA is going to be practiced differently across different countries and different cultures, and that's something that we need to be sensitive to, especially as ABA is expanding internationally. And then lastly, she really stressed throughout all of her research that there are universal principles of ABA that can be applied across settings, and that there may always be these discrepancies that we have about individual practices, but we can push for this common ground in that empirical data collection, increased caregiver and public awareness about autism, and some of the fundamental principles of ABA, like let's check, take data, make sure that this is working, regardless of what that individual practice is or looks like. So these are my works cited. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I highly encourage anybody to go and access these articles themselves. They're really easy reads. She has a very great way of talking about scientific topics without it being too jargony or too dense. And all of these are free either through ResearchGate or through Google Scholar. So I encourage everybody to check them out and read a little bit more about this if this is a topic that interests you. Thanks for listening, and that is all.